So now that the JBL Xtreme 3 is here, naturally people want to know how it stacks up to the Boombox 2. Now obviously, the Boombox 2 is going to get louder and have more bass than the Xtreme 3. But to make things more interesting, we're also going to be comparing the Xtreme 3 and the Boombox 2 to JBL's newest portable Bluetooth speaker, the JBL Partybox on the go. So if you're looking for a large portable Bluetooth speaker, let's see which one's right for you. Now, when it comes to pricing, believe it or not, the Partybox on the go is the cheapest speaker here, retailing for $300. Whereas the Xtreme 3 retails for $350 and the JBL Boombox 2 retails for $500. Now, I'm willing to bet that some people are going to be like, hey, they should just pick up the Partybox because it's the largest and cheapest speaker here. Now, even though the Partybox does have some very unique features, it might not be the best for everybody, and you might be better off with the Xtreme 3 or Boombox 2. Regardless, if you want to pick any of these speakers up, they will be linked down below, and if you want to learn more about any of these speakers, please watch the full reviews, because we're only going to be going over their main differences. Now, first off, we've got to talk about design, because these speakers are very different from one another. Now, obviously, the biggest difference between these speakers is just their sheer size. The Partybox absolutely dwarfs both the Boombox 2 and Xtreme 3. Now, the Partybox isn't just larger than these other two speakers, but it's also significantly heavier, weighing in at 22.4 pounds. Whereas the Boombox 2 weighs in at 13 pounds and the Xtreme 3 weighs in at 4.3 pounds. Now, even though the Partybox does have a shoulder strap, lugging the speaker around is a pain in the neck when compared to these other two speakers. But also, if portability is a big deal to you, then material choice is very important. Since the Partybox has a mostly plastic body, it can be a scratch magnet. Whereas both the Xtreme 3 and Boombox 2 are rocking fabric bodies, so they're going to be able to stand up to constant bumps and scrapes much better than the Partybox. And it also doesn't hurt that both the Xtreme 3 and Boombox 2 are waterproof, so if they get wet, you don't gotta worry about them. Whereas even though the Partybox is IPX4 rated, meaning that it is water resistant, personally, I would avoid getting the speaker wet just to be safe. So overall, even though you can definitely take the Partybox on the go with you, lugging the speaker around is nowhere near as easy as taking either the Boombox 2 or Xtreme 3. So if portability is a big deal to you, then you'll definitely be better off with either of these two speakers. But if you want maximum portability, then you'll definitely want to go with the Xtreme 3. However, something that the Partybox really has going for it is that it does have a built-in light feature, and in general, this light feature looks really good, and you even have a few different lighting modes to choose from. However, just keep in mind that you can't remotely adjust or customize this light feature like you can with the JBL Partybox 310, which was announced alongside this speaker. But overall, I do feel that the light feature on the Partybox is going to look awesome in like a small man cave. But now let's talk about tech specs. When it comes to battery life, these speakers are very different from one another. Now, the Partybox has an advertised battery life of 6 hours, but that's when the speaker is playing at 50% volume, with this light feature turned off and with this bass boost feature turned off as well. Now, at 50% volume, this speaker gets more than loud enough for indoor use, but with this bass boost feature turned off, it does sound rather flat, making it sound rather not all that impressive for its sheer size. Now, the bass boost feature on this speaker has 2 levels to it, but I'm assuming that most people are going to use this speaker while in bass boost level 2. Now, real-world use with this speaker playing at 80% volume, with this light feature turned on, and with this bass boost set to level 2, we're looking at a real-world battery life of around an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of playback time, which really isn't all that impressive given this speaker's sheer size and weight. Now, you could always stretch out this speaker's battery life by using it with its bass boost set to level 1, but if you are going to try to get the most out of this speaker, then you are going to have to sacrifice battery life. And keep in mind, if you were to use this speaker at a higher volume, then its battery is going to drain even faster. So even though JBL is trying to market this speaker as an ultra portable party box, the reality is this speaker is going to mostly live on its charger and can only be unplugged for short periods of time. But then there's the Boombox 2 and the Xtreme 3, which have an advertised battery life of 24 hours and 15 hours respectively. but keep in mind those numbers are for when these speakers are playing at 50% volume. Real world use with both of these speakers playing at 80% volume, the Boombox 2 is good for around 7 hours of playback time, and the Xtreme 3 is good for around 8 to 9 hours of playback time. Both much better than what the Partybox had to offer. But again, if you are looking for maximum portability, then you are going to be better off with the Xtreme 3 here. Now, when it comes to connectivity, all of these speakers can be connected to 2 Bluetooth devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJ, and they all still have an audio jack, so you can use a wired connection with any of these speakers. Now, I know this sounds basic, but I do want to point it out because a lot of speakers these days are starting to remove their audio jacks. Specifically, JBL removed the audio jacks on both the JBL Pulse 4 and JBL Flip 5. Now, when it comes to ports, something that I think that's really cool about the Xtreme 3 is that it now charges via a USB-C port, whereas these other two speakers charge via an AC port. But the really cool thing about the USB-C port on the Xtreme 3 is that you can actually use it to charge your own devices. Now, I think this is awesome because a lot of phones these days are starting to come included with USB-C cables, but all of these speakers still have a USB-A out port so that you can still charge your own devices if you have an older charging cable. However, the USB-A port on the Partybox also allows you to plug in a USB drive and play music off of it, whereas the USB-A ports on both the Xtreme 3 and Boombox 2 are strictly used for charging your own devices. Another unique thing about the Partybox is that it does come included with a wireless microphone, and it also has a microphone and guitar input. So the Partybox can be useful if you do plan on hosting events, karaoke, or something. Now, just keep in mind the dials on top of this speaker are strictly used for adjusting the echo, treble, and bass of any microphone or guitar you might have hooked up to this speaker. These dials are not used for adjusting the sound of your music. But now let's talk about actually listening to music with these speakers. Regarding speaker setups, both the Xtreme 3 and Boombox 2 are rocking dual frontward firing woofers, dual frontward firing tweeters, and they both have dual passive radiators shooting out the sides. Now, the good thing about the speaker setups on both the Xtreme 3 and Boombox 2 is that you can always up their bass by placing them in a corner so that their bass has something to bounce off of. Whereas the Partybox on the go has a single frontward firing woofer with frontward firing exhaust ports and dual tweeters up top. But since the exhaust ports on the speakers shoot out the front, you can't easily raise its bass like you can with other speakers out there. Now, when it comes to output, the Xtreme 3 is rated at 50 watts RMS, the Boombox 2 is rated at 80 watts RMS, and the Partybox is rated at 100 watts RMS. But the thing is, all of these speakers can only hit those numbers when they're plugged in. And just keep in mind that while running off of battery power, the Boombox 2 is rated at 60 watts RMS, whereas the Partybox is rated at 50 watts RMS. But now, we're going to be jumping into a sound test. Now, the Xtreme 3 is playing at max volume, whereas both the Boombox 2 and Partybox are playing at 80% volume. But also, the Partybox is playing with this bass boost feature set to level 2.
Tongue-tied midnight. You can say all that you want, but you and I were meant for this. You know, sometimes we hide behind this illusion that we're done. Oh, please see that you're wrong in this. I don't fall in love cause I'm here tonight. I don't wanna say it, but it just feels right. I think the girl's just the best time. that you can't love. We should've never let this go. No, we were the catch on the summer nights. Kids in the street that got it right. Every time I felt to let go, every time I felt to let go. Wasting it all for you. Don't get me wrong, but I'm done with these games. No one to say. You and I are stuck on this. I can't seem to let it go. It's not too late. Just show little faith this time. You can knock me down, but I'll find a way. She said you don't know. She said you don't know. If this is what you want, if you wanna go, I'll have to go and let it breathe. But I'll be waiting here, you see. I don't know if everything will be alright. Sometimes you gotta let go. Guess I gotta let you go.
So when it comes to sound signatures, the Xtreme 3 does like to put more of an emphasis on the highs than the Boombox 2, and the Boombox 2 puts a little more of an emphasis on the highs than the Partybox OTG. And when it comes to bass, the Partybox has more bass than the Boombox 2, and the Boombox 2 has more bass than the Xtreme 3. But when it comes to soundstage and instrument separation, I gotta say the Boombox 2 sounds more open than the Partybox. But something all three of these speakers do have in common is how their bass behaves as you raise their volume. With all of these speakers, their bass really only increases up until 80% volume, and then after that, really only their mids and highs get louder, making them sound a little nasally. But overall, sound quality wise, even though the Partybox might be more fun to listen to because of all the wall shaking bass, I do think the Boombox 2 is the better sounding speaker here because it sounds more open. Now, even though the bass on the Boombox 2 doesn't shake walls nearly as much as the Partybox, it still resonates a good deal. And when it comes to max volume, again, the Boombox 2 does come out on top. Keep in mind that while on battery power, this speaker is rated at 60 watts RMS, whereas the Partybox is rated at 50 watts RMS. But also, the Boombox 2 just sounds louder than the Partybox because it does put a little more emphasis on the mids and highs. And then there's the Xtreme 3, which does a good job of keeping up with the Boombox 2, but it's just not going to sound as full. But like I mentioned earlier, if you were to use these speakers while they're plugged in, they're going to get a little louder and push out more bass. But still, even while it's plugged in, the Boombox 2 still gets louder than the Partybox, mainly because it does put a little more emphasis on the mids and highs. So overall, when it comes to sound, the Partybox is the warmest sounding speaker here, and it has the most wall shaking bass here. But I do feel the Boombox 2 sounds better than the Partybox because it sounds more open. But you're not going to have nearly as much wall shaking bass. And then there's the Xtreme 3, which sounds open, but it's a brighter sounding speaker because it does put even more of an emphasis on the mids and highs. But finally, let's talk about speaker pairing protocols. Now, both the Xtreme 3 and Boombox 2 have been upgraded to JBL Partyboost, meaning that you can wirelessly pair them up to either another Boombox 2, an Xtreme 3, a JBL Flip 5, or a JBL Pulse 4. But this also means that you cannot wirelessly pair a JBL Partyboost speaker to an older JBL speaker using JBL Connect Plus, like let's say an original Boombox, an Xtreme 2, a Charge 3, a Charge 4, a Flip 4, or a JBL Pulse 3. And with the Partybox on the go, you can only wirelessly pair it up to one other Partybox on the go and get left and right stereo sound going. But you cannot pair the Partybox on the go to any other Partybox, and you also can't pair a Partybox to a Partyboost speaker. So there's definitely a lot of fragmentation going on with JBL right now. So with all that being said, here's my breakdown. If you're looking for an ultra portable Bluetooth speaker to constantly take on the go with you, then you'll definitely want to go with the JBL Xtreme 3. The Xtreme 3 has a good real-world battery life of about 8 to 9 hours. Its sheer small size, lightweight, and shoulder strap makes it super easy to take on the go with you. And the fact that you can use its USB-C port to charge your own devices is a very nice touch, especially if you have a newer phone. And overall, it sounds good. But if you want something louder, that sounds wider, and has more bass, but you still want to easily take it on the go with you, then you might want to go with the Boombox 2. But then there's the Partybox on the go, which I feel is a very niche speaker. Even though, yes, it is battery powered and it has a shoulder strap just like the Xtreme 3, carrying the speaker around can be a pain in the neck, literally. And the fact that the speaker has a very short battery life doesn't bode well for its portability. And even though this speaker does have the most wall-shaking bass here, it doesn't sound very open. But like I mentioned in the full review, the Partybox OTG might be a good option if you plan on constantly either using the included wireless microphone or the microphone or guitar inputs on this speaker either to host events or for karaoke. But this isn't a speaker that I would pick up for its portability. This is a speaker that you're better off using mostly while it's plugged in and only occasionally using its battery power for short periods of time. But I can't deny that this speaker would look sick in a small man cave thanks to its light feature. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.